Over millions of years, species of plants and animals have adapted to the environmental conditions in which they live. This has led to an amazing variety and biodiversity of life on our planet. Coral has found a niche in shallow tropical waters. Ducks have adapted to live in the ponds and waterways. Kudus and oryxes thrive on the savanna grasslands of Africa. But organisms do not live in isolation. They live within ecosystems, a habitat where plants, animals, and microorganisms interact with each other and with their natural surroundings. There are many types of ecosystems. A pond is a good example. So is an ocean shore, a farmer's field, or a forest glen. An ecosystem includes both the biotic, or living components, and the abiotic, or non-living components of the system. All of the living organisms found in an ecosystem are known as its biota. These living things integrated together make up a community. In order for a species to survive, it must have a niche within the community so it can gain the food necessary for its survival and reproduce its young. We are going to look at the interdependence that exists within ecosystems and point to some of the pressing environmental problems that are threatening many of our ecosystems today. In every ecosystem, there are two different types of organisms, producers and consumers. The producers, or autotrophs, can produce their own food. These are photosynthesizing organisms like plants and some microorganisms. Consumers are called heterotrophs. There are different types of consumers. Herbivores that only eat plants are classified as primary consumers, and carnivores are called secondary consumers because they live off the primary consumers. Fungi and bacteria that eat dead and decaying organisms are called decomposers, but they also are consumers. They are very important in the food web because they break down dead matter like grass, tree trunks, and the remains of animals so that nutrients are returned to the soil. Within an ecosystem, all of the producers, consumers, secondary consumers, and decomposers make up an interdependent community. One of the ways that they interrelate is through the food web. The food web within an ecosystem is actually made up of many overlapping food chains of predators and prey. For example, on the African plain, grass grows in abundance. A herbivore, such as an antelope, eats the grass. A carnivore, like a lion, kills and devours the antelope. Jackals eat the remains. Worms, ants, and bacteria consume what is left, and someday will feed on the lions and jackals when they die. Since most species eat and are eaten by more than one other species, these food chains link together into a food web. Consequently, changes affecting one group ultimately can impact on several others. Food chains exist in all ecosystems. There are many different cycles within communities of organisms, but there are also cycles within the abiotic, or non-living components of ecosystems. Energy flows through the ecosystem. First, energy is captured by the producers, those plants and microorganisms that can produce their own food by photosynthesis. Then, the energy passes along the food chain to consumers, such as herbivores, carnivores, and decomposers. All of these different feeding levels, or trophic levels as they are called, form a type of energy pyramid in ecosystems. As the energy passes from level to level, less and less usable energy is available to organisms at the higher levels. Biologists estimate that on average, only 10% of the plant's accumulated energy is passed on to the body of the organism that eats it. Where does the rest go? Some is used for digestion, work, growth, and reproduction, but only about 10% remains in the tissue of the animal that ate it. The rest of the energy is dissipated as heat. When the energy is passed to the next trophic level, for example, from the herbivore that eats the plant to the carnivore that eats it, the energy that is retained again is reduced to 10%, and the rest is not available. At each trophic level, there is a decrease of about 90% of the energy available. Despite this reduction in energy, the ecosystem is sustainable because the number of organisms, or biomass, at each trophic level is also reduced by at least 90%. The biomass at the bottom level is so great and replenishes itself so quickly, it can sustain the organisms at the higher levels. While energy flows through ecosystems, a number of other substances are recycled and never lost. Water, a necessity of life for all living things, is constantly recycled. It can lie in a lake for a time and then flow into the sea. It evaporates into the atmosphere. The wind blows the water vapor a distance and then it falls as rain. The water can remain in the soil, be absorbed by plants and drunk by animals. It is constantly being recycled, not only through ecosystems, but also through the entire biosphere. The carbon cycle is based on carbon dioxide, CO2. During photosynthesis, producers, such as plants, build carbon compounds. When plants are eaten, the carbon is broken down by cellular respiration and used as energy by other organisms, but most is released into the atmosphere or into the oceans where it is recycled. Carbon is also trapped in fossil fuels such as oil and coal. When these fuels are burned, they release the carbon into the atmosphere. Over time, the carbon dioxide has built up in the atmosphere to produce what is called the greenhouse effect and global warming, one of the most serious environmental problems that we are facing. At the local level, ecosystems can be overwhelmed by heavy concentrations of any of the elements that enter the system. For example, nitrogen makes up 78% of the Earth's atmosphere, but only very small amounts are in the soil, oceans, and organisms. It is recycled through ecosystems by some plants, bacteria, and decomposers. In recent years, large amounts of nitrogen fertilizer has been added to the soils to increase crop production. This is leading to the acidity of soils and the pollution of watercourses. Phosphorus is also required as a nutrient for plants, and like nitrogen, it is being added to soils in fertilizer. Runoff from farmland containing these two chemicals overstimulates algae growth in lakes and rivers. This robs the water of oxygen and suffocates the aquatic life.